Mark Johnson sat in his home office, bathed in the soft light of two computer monitors that cast a bluish glow on the walls of their home in Oak Park, a quiet Chicago suburb. The clicking of keys was the only sound in the late-night quiet. Lines of code glowed on the screen, a patch for corporate software he was supposed to deliver by morning. But his fingers moved sluggishly. His thoughts slipped away like data in a poorly optimized database. The cursor blinked in anticipation. The program waited for logic, a solution, a conclusion, and he waited for the answer he feared. His gaze fell on the wall again. The frames were simple, wooden, slightly faded with time. He and Emily at their wedding, she in an ivory dress, smiling at the camera, holding his hand tightly. He remembered every detail of that day, the smell of perfume, the feel of the fabric under his fingers, the slight tremor of her fingers as they said their vows. Then there's a photo from the beach in Miami where they're laughing, sunburned, awkwardly holding coconuts. Happiness, messy, real. Then a barbecue at a friend's house where she looks at him in a way no one else has. 5 years. 5 years that now seemed as fragile as glass, ready to crack at the slightest blow. He sighed, ran a hand over his face. The work chat continued to ping him with questions. He closed the window. To hell with the code. Nothing else mattered right now. He reached for his phone, but the screen remained dark. No messages. No missed calls. Just silence, thick and viscous. He knew where Emily was, or at least he had an idea. And this knowledge didn't make it any easier. Emily had changed. Mark had noticed it months ago, but in recent weeks the changes had become palpable, like a bug in the system that couldn't be ignored. The woman who used to fall asleep snuggled up against him while they watched the latest season of The Office on Netflix, now came home late, citing work. Her phone, always face down, buzzed with messages she called just business. But Mark could see her hiding the screen when he walked into the room, her fingers hovering over the keyboard, as if she were afraid he'd notice something out of place. Tonight she'd gone out for another team dinner, the third in a month. Mark was alone, and the usually cozy silence of the house was now as oppressive as an error message in a log file. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. There was an empty can of Red Bull on the table and a half-drunk cup of Starbucks coffee next to it, cold a couple of hours ago. Mark was a programmer, a cybersecurity specialist, and his job required attention to detail. He was good at finding vulnerabilities in systems, seeing things that others missed. And now those skills were working against him, picking up on every little detail in Emily's behavior. Her too bright smile when she talked about her boss, David, her habit of deflecting the conversation when he asked about work, her new perfume that smelled too expensive for their budget. "Damn, Mark, you're being paranoid," he muttered, looking at his reflection in the dark screen of the second monitor. His dark hair was tousled, and there were shadows under his eyes from lack of sleep. Maybe it's just stress. She's got a new project, that's all. But the words didn't ring true. He knew what a bug looked like, and this wasn't just a glitch in the software. It was a crack in their marriage, and it was growing wider every day. Mark opened the messenger where his last conversation with Emily was dated yesterday morning. A short, "Love, see you later" from her, and his response, a heart emoji. Now it seemed like a taunt. He scrolled up the chat, looking for hints, but found none. Just her usual, "I'll be late, don't wait up," and "David's having another all-night meeting." David. The name came up too often. In dinner conversations, in casual conversations, in stories about work. First as part of the background, then as a refrain. David Smith, the CEO of the marketing firm where Emily worked as a project manager. Charismatic, with a smile like a talk show host and a reputation for getting his way. He was a good talker, a good listener, and knew when silence worked better than words. Emily mentioned him with admiration. David had a great idea. "You should have heard how he inspired the whole department today. He really knows how to get the most out of a team." At first, Mark smiled and waved it off. So what? Her boss is finally not an idiot. But gradually the tone changed. There was a special tension in her voice that Mark had not heard for a long time when she spoke about him. Excitement, a spark. He had seen David a couple of times at corporate parties. Tall, self-assured, wore expensive suits as if he had been born in them, with a slight gray at the temples attractive, like in an advertisement for watches or cars. A trained voice, polished gestures, and a manner of speaking as if the world were his presentation. Then Mark laughed, calling him a walking LinkedIn profile. Emily rolled her eyes and chuckled. But now, remembering that smile, he didn't see the lightness in it. He saw the distance in it, as if she had already been somewhere else. He began to notice the little things. How she hid in the bathroom with her phone. How she turned off the sound on notifications. How she laughed differently too freely. And how she asked him about his day less and less often. And most importantly, how often did he appear in her stories, he, and how rarely we. Mark glanced at the frames on the wall again. A wedding, a beach, a barbecue, stories in which he had been a part. But now he felt like a character being cut from the script. He opened his laptop, but not the ide, not his email. He went online. He found David Smith's profile. Smooth posts, conference photos, motivational speech videos. Everything is perfect, verified, flawless. And in the comments among the likes and emojis, Emily's name. Her words, her, wow, that was powerful. Her, proud to be part of this team. He closed the laptop, his heart pounding like a jackhammer. He knew what had to be done, but he was afraid that by doing this, he would lose not only the truth, but also the illusion in which he could still hide. He stood up and paced the room, trying to clear his mind. Their house was typical Oak Park, 2 stories with hardwood floors, white walls, and a large living room window overlooking a neat lawn. They'd bought it 3 years ago, spending their savings and taking out a mortgage. It had been their project, their dream, the place where they'd planned to raise their children. But now the house felt empty, even when Emily was there. Their dog, Max, a lazy-eyed Labrador, slept on the living room couch, unaware of the tension in the air. Mark paused at Emily's office door. Her MacBook sat on her desk, next to neatly stacked folders and her favorite mug that read Boss Lady. He knew her password, Max 2018, her dog's name, and the year they were married. Emily had never been good at cybersecurity, which had always made Mark happy. Now the thought made him bitter. Check her laptop? That would be too much. A breach of trust. But hadn't she been the one to break it first? If I'm wrong, I'll just apologize, he said out loud, as if convincing an empty room. And if not, he didn't finish. His heart was pounding as he sat down at her desk and opened his laptop. The screen lit up, asking for a password. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, but he punched in the combination. Emily's desk was cluttered. Presentation files, notes, photos from her last work trip. Mark opened her email, feeling like a thief, even though this was their shared home. The emails were mostly work-related, campaign discussions, reports, reminders. But one email, sent yesterday, stood out. From David Smith, no subject. You were amazing today. See you tomorrow. At the end, a winking smiley. Mark stared at the screen, feeling the blood rush to his temples. Irresistible. The word cut like a splinter. He clicked on the email, hoping for context, but that was all there was. He scrolled further, but there were no other emails from David in the folder. Had she deleted them? Or were they communicating elsewhere, WhatsApp, Telegram, hell, Snapchat? Mark knew how easy it was to hide conversations. He taught clients how to protect their data. Easy, Mark, he said, closing his laptop. That doesn't mean anything. Maybe he's just flirting, and she's not responding. But doubts had already taken root. He returned to his office, sat down at his computer, and opened a browser. His fingers typed David's name into LinkedIn. The profile was perfect. CEO, speaker at conferences, photos from charity galas and marathons. David was married to Laura Smith, a lawyer with an impressive resume. Their Instagram was full of family photos, 2 kids, a dog, vacations in Aspen. Mark felt a twinge of envy mixed with anger. If David was so perfect, why would he flirt with Emily? He opened a new file in his code editor. The idea that had seemed crazy an hour ago was now taking shape. Mark knew how to track data. He did it for clients, protecting their systems from hackers. But now he could use his skills in a different way, to check what was going on. Not just her laptop, but everything: her phone, her messages, her life. If Emily was hiding something, he would find it. And if he was wrong, he would erase the code and forget about it. "You always said there was truth in the data," he muttered, opening the Scapy library documentation. "Let's see what the data says." He began writing, his fingers moving faster than his thoughts. The script would intercept traffic from their home Wi-Fi, filtering out messages related to Emily or David. He'd add logging to an encrypted file so no one, not even Emily, would notice. It wasn't hard basic for a man who'd spent years finding vulnerabilities in networks. But the morality of the matter made his heart beat faster. "If I do this, there's no turning back," he said, looking at the screen. "But if they—" He didn't finish the thought. Instead, he finished his Red Bull, feeling the caffeine pumping through his blood. The code began to take shape, importing libraries, setting up filters, processing packets. He tested the script by sending himself a text from his phone. The log updated. Test. Works. Mark exhaled, but there was no relief. He knew this code could destroy everything he loved, or prove that he was still loved. The clock showed 11:12 p.m. Emily was due back in an hour, if not later. Mark saved the file, called it Network Monitor Pi, and ran it in the background. Now all he had to do was wait. He stood up, walked around the house, and looked into the living room. Max lifted his head, lazily wagged his tail, and fell asleep again. Mark smiled, but it was a bitter smile. "At least you won't betray me, old man," he said, scratching the dog behind the ear. He returned to his desk, but the code to work was still intact. Instead, he opened a chat with their mutual friend, Nick, who worked at the same company. "Nick, have you ever?" "Well, suspected Kate," he wrote, referring to Nick's wife. He regretted the message almost immediately. Not because he didn't trust Nick, on the contrary. Nick was his oldest friend, the person who had stood by him in the most difficult moments. It's just that such questions cannot be asked lightly, especially over chat, especially without context. The answer came within a minute. "Bro, what's wrong? Emily, she loves you. What happened?" Mark stared at the screen. The words died in his throat. If he had spoken out loud, he probably would have simply shut up. He couldn't explain it all. The letter from David, Emily's strange behavior in recent weeks, the script he'd written to spy on his wife. It all sounded crazy, like paranoia, or worse, like betrayal. He ran his hand over his face. The room was dark, lit only by the laptop screen. It was quiet behind the door. Emily had already gone to bed, or pretended to. He dialed. "Oh well, I'm just tired. Forget it." His finger hovered over the send button. He almost deleted the message, but he pressed it anyway. Nick's answer came almost immediately. "Okay, but if anything happens, call, and go to bed, Coder." Mark chuckled faintly. Old Nick. He always knew how to cheer you up, even when he didn't understand what he really needed saving from. He put the phone down on the table and closed his eyes. But there was still no sleep. Just the feeling that he was balancing on something fragile, something that could crack under him at any second and drag everything he considered real into the void. He opened the fridge, got another can of Red Bull, and returned to the computer. The script was running, silently collecting data. Tomorrow he will check the logs. Tomorrow he would find out if he was right. Or maybe he was still the husband Emily loved, and not the paranoid man who was losing her. He looked at the photograph on the table, him and Emily in the park, laughing, her blonde hair blowing in the wind. Mark felt his throat tighten. He didn't want to be right, but if he wasn't going to let them just walk away. "The truth is in the data," he repeated, his voice disappearing into the silence of the house. Mark sat in his home office, surrounded by the hum of his computer fans and the smell of cold coffee. The clock on his screen showed 11:47 p.m., but he wasn't ready to sleep. He was holding his second can of Red Bull that evening, its metallic taste mingling with the bitter taste of suspicion that was nagging at him. The Scapy documentation glowed on one monitor, and an empty file in his code editor awaited his solution on the other. The discovery of yesterday, an email from David Smith in Emily's inbox, still burned like an open wound. "You were irresistible today. I'll see you tomorrow." The words swirled in his head like a loop that couldn't be dismissed. The Oak Park house was quiet, except for Max, their Labrador, who was sprawled on the living room couch, snoring. Emily hadn't returned from yet another team dinner, and Mark wasn't sure if he wanted her to walk through the door right now or to stay away forever. He felt on edge, between wanting to believe her and being afraid that the truth would ruin everything. But Mark was a programmer, a man who lived by the principle of trust but verify, and now he was going to verify. "Okay, old man," he said, addressing his reflection on the dark screen. "You always said the data doesn't lie. It's time to find out what it's hiding." He opened a terminal and began typing. His fingers moved quickly, with the confidence that comes from knowing a tool by heart. Python was his language of choice, flexible, powerful, perfect for tasks that involved digging into network traffic. Mark decided to create a script that would intercept data from their home Wi-Fi. Not just email, but everything. Text messages, social media DMs, even files Emily sent and received. He knew it was possible he'd done similar things for clients, protecting their systems from leaks. But now the client was him, and the stakes were his marriage. The first thing he did was import Scapy, a network packet sniffing library. It was an old friend, a tool he'd used back in college when he wrote network testing utilities. He set up a filter to capture TCP packets and added a handler that would look for mentions of Emily or David's names. The logs would be saved to an encrypted file on his personal server, so no one, especially Emily, would notice. Mark wasn't a hooded, black screen hacker in the movies, but he knew how to be stealthy. Mark ran his eyes over the code, checking every line. It was basic, but it worked. He ran the script on a test device, sending himself a message via WhatsApp. A second later, the log updated. Test message. Success. He added a few improvements of filter by Emily's phone's IP address, log compression to save disk space, and basic encryption for the file. If Emily decided to poke around in his server, and she occasionally went there to download old photos, she wouldn't find anything. "Well, Mark, you're officially a stalker," he muttered, sipping his Red Bull. "Congratulations." He chuckled, but it was a crooked smile. It wasn't funny. He didn't feel the slightest irony in what was happening, only emptiness and a dull fear gnawing at him from within. He felt like a traitor, although the betrayal didn't seem to come from him. Or maybe it was the other way around. Maybe he was just going crazy, seeing things that weren't there, imagining things, replacing reality with suspicions. Mark leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. The room seemed to be suffocated, the air became thick as syrup. Silence, only the hum of the processor and the barely audible ticking of the clock. Thoughts rushed one after another, but they all revolved around one thing: Emily. That night came back to him 2 weeks ago, what had seemed like another normal chapter of their lives. Dinner at their favorite Italian restaurant in downtown Chicago. Soft lighting, vibrant tablecloths, the smell of rosemary and roasted garlic. She sat across from him, wearing the red dress he adored, her blonde hair hanging loosely around her shoulders, her skin glowing with wine and laughter. It all looked so right. "He's like, she said then, absent-mindedly twirling the stem of her glass. "He lights everyone up. He says, 'Emily, you're our secret trump card.'" I almost fell off my chair. Mark smiled then, automatically. It seemed like nothing special, just a story from work. But even then, something had pricked him. A secret trump card. He hadn't attached any significance to it then, but now these words resonated completely differently. Too personal. Too intimate. He remembered her checking her phone right at the table. Twice, maybe 3 times, seemingly by accident. Her fingers flew across the screen, and each time she looked away, as if she were trying to stay in the moment, but something kept pulling her there into another conversation. He asked then, "Who is writing?" "Oh, just a colleague. Nonsense." She waved it off. He believed. He wanted to believe. Now no. Now this "just a colleague" was taking shape, and a name, David, a senior project manager with whom Emily had been working on the same case for 3 months now. Mark knew little about him, but enough to understand: charismatic, sociable, the kind of person who easily gets close to people, especially those who, like Emily, know how to listen and laugh at the right moment. He clenched his fists without even noticing it. His heart was beating slowly but dully, as if somewhere deep in the water. He didn't know what he was more afraid of: that she was actually lying, or that he was beginning to suspect her without grounds, that he himself, with his own hands, destroys what was real. And where the hell is the line between reality and his fears? His phone beeped, yanking him out of his memories. A message from Nick, his friend and colleague. "Bro, are you still alive? Or are you drowning in code?" Mark chuckled and typed, "Alive, but the code is killing me. How are you?" "It's fine," Nick answered almost immediately. "Kate's going to some concert tomorrow. I pray for your salvation." "Why aren't you sleeping? Is Emily at work again?" Mark froze, his fingers hovering over the screen. He wanted to write the truth: that he was digging through her life, that he had found a letter from her boss, that he was afraid of losing her. But instead he wrote, "Yes, another corporate party, and I'm here catching a bug." "Poor guy," Nick replied, adding a beer emoji. "Tell her to take you with her. Maybe their boss will buy you a whiskey." "Ha, maybe," Mark typed, but his fingers were shaking. He imagined David sipping his whiskey, his smug smile on his face, Emily laughing at his jokes. His stomach clenched. He dropped the phone on the table and went back to typing. The script was almost ready, but Mark decided to add notifications. If something with David's name appeared in the log, he would get a push to his phone. He connected a simple library to send messages through the Telegram bot he used for work projects. It took another half hour, but now he was sure that he would not miss anything. "You're ready, my little spy," he said, running the final version of the script. The terminal blinked, indicating that the process was in progress. Their home network was now under his control. Every message, every file that passed through the Wi-Fi would be checked. Mark felt both triumphant and sick. This was his trade, his comfort zone, but now it felt dirty. He stood up, paced the room, trying to calm himself. There was a picture of their wedding on the wall: Emily in a white dress, he in a navy suit, both laughing as if the world belonged to them. Mark paused, looking at her face. She was beautiful, always had been. Her green eyes, her smile that still made his heart skip a beat. How could she? Or was he making this all up, winding himself up over one stupid letter? "If I'm wrong, I'll delete all of this," he told the photos. "I promise. But if you're with him." He didn't finish. Instead, he went back to the table, opened the drawer, and pulled out the pack of cigarettes he'd been hiding from Emily. He hadn't smoked in a year, but he needed something to drown out the noise in his head. He walked out into the backyard, where the cool June air smelled of grass and the neighbor's barbecue. He lit a cigarette and took a drag, feeling the nicotine calm his nerves. The sky was clear, the stars filtering through the streetlights. Mark looked at them, thinking about how simple things had been 5 years ago, when he and Emily had been lying on a beach in Florida, counting the stars and dreaming of the future. "We were going to have kids," he said out loud, exhaling smoke. "A house, a family, all that fucking American dream. And now I'm writing code to spy on you." He stubbed his cigarette out on the porch railing and went back into the house. Max looked up as Mark walked through the living room, but he fell asleep again. Mark envied him. The dog lived without doubt, without fear that his world would collapse. He sat down at the computer and checked the log. Empty so far. Emily hadn't sent anything since she left. Or was she too busy with David? His phone beeped again. This time it was from Emily. "I'm running late, don't wait up. Love you." Mark stared at the screen, feeling anger mingle with pain. "Love you." The word now sounded like a taunt. He wanted to respond with something harsh, but instead he wrote, "Okay, see you tomorrow." He sent it and immediately regretted it. Maybe he should have called, asked where she was, who she was with, but he knew she would lie, or worse, tell the truth. He opened her Instagram, which he hadn't done in a long time. The latest post was a photo of her and her colleagues at an event, all in business suits, holding glasses. Emily was in the center, smiling, her hand on David's shoulder. The caption, "Dream Team in action, work hard, play hard." Mark felt the blood rush to his temples. He scrolled through the comments. "Beautiful M. David is the boss of the year." Nothing obvious, but every emoji seemed like evidence. "Shit, that's enough," he said, closing the browser. He didn't want to become obsessed. But it was too late. The script was already running, and the data was starting to come in. He checked the log again, still empty. Maybe she was just busy working. Maybe he was panicking for nothing. To distract himself, he opened a work project, the patch he was supposed to deliver that morning. But the lines of code blurred before his eyes. He couldn't think about work when his life was falling apart. Instead, he texted Nick, "Hey, if Kate started hanging out with the boss late at night, how would you react?" Nick replied a few minutes later, "Bro, are you serious? Emily and her boss? She'd rather quit than be with a peacock like that. What are you thinking?" "If I knew," Mark typed, "it's just that. She comes home late, she's always with him." And he found one letter. Strange. "What letter?" Nick asked. "Send it to me, we'll sort it out." Mark hesitated. He didn't want to share this with Nick, didn't want anyone else to know how far he'd fallen. "I'll tell you later," he wrote. "Good day." "Okay, but don't get worked up," Nick replied. "Talk to her. No spy stuff." Mark chuckled. Talk. As if it were that easy. He imagined asking Emily, "Are you sleeping with David?" She would laugh, or get angry, or confirm. And then what? He wasn't ready for the answer. Not yet. He went back to the script and added another feature, an alert, if a media file, like a photo or video, showed up in the traffic. He knew that could be the key. If Emily was sending David something personal, it wouldn't just be text. He set up a filter and tested it by sending himself a photo from his phone. The log updated, showing the file's metadata. Everything worked like clockwork. The clock read 1:15. Emily was still missing. Mark felt fatigue creeping up on him, but the adrenaline kept him going. He couldn't stop. Not when he was so close to the truth. He saved the code, naming the file Shadow Pie, the shadow that would watch his wife. The name seemed appropriate. "I'm sorry, Em," he said, looking at their wedding photo, "but you left me no choice." He ran the script in the background, set up the server to sync every 10 minutes, and sat back. Now he had to wait. Tomorrow he will check the logs. Tomorrow he would find out if his life had been a lie. Or maybe he was still the husband Emily loved, and not the paranoid man who was ruining their marriage. Mark closed his eyes, feeling his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know what was worse, finding evidence or finding nothing. But he knew one thing for sure. The data didn't lie, and soon it would tell him everything. Rain pounded the windows of his Oak Park home, turning the suburban street into a blurry watercolor. Mark Johnson sat in his office, staring at the screen where his terminal showed his script, Shadow the Pie, running smoothly. It had been a week since he'd launched it, and in that time their home had become as alien to him as a server he'd lost access to. Emily came and went, her smiles forced, her conversations as empty as a Twitter feed. Mark lived in anticipation, checking his logs every night, hoping they'd stay clean. But today, on a gray Thursday, his phone beeped, and a notification from a Telegram bot struck like lightning. Media file detected. Source, Emily_iPhone. Destination, David_Smith. Mark froze, his heart pounding in his throat. He put down his half-finished can of Monster he'd run out of Red Bull yesterday and opened the server log. His fingers shook as he typed in his password. The screen is filled with rows of data, file metadata, IP addresses, timestamps. The photo sent from Emily's phone to David's number had been uploaded to the cloud, and the script had automatically saved a copy. Mark clicked on the file, holding his breath. The image loaded slowly, as if the internet knew he wasn't ready. Emily, in their bathroom, wearing black lace lingerie he'd never seen before. She was standing in front of the mirror, phone in hand, her lips pursed into a small smile. The caption, intercepted by the script, read, "Missed you yesterday. This is for you." David's response came a minute later. "God, you're driving me crazy. I can't wait for tomorrow." Mark stared at the screen, feeling the world crumble. His wife. Hi, Emily. With another man. He closed his eyes, but the image remained, seared into his memory. His stomach twisted, his throat tightened like a noose. He wanted to scream, to smash the monitor, to call her and spill it all. But instead he sat, motionless, a frozen process, as the rain pounded the glass. "Bitch," he blurted out, his voice hoarse, almost alien. He slammed his fist on the table, and the can of Monster toppled over, splattering the keyboard with sticky liquid. "Fuck, fuck, fuck." He jumped up, wiping his hands on his jeans, and began pacing the room. Max, awakened by the noise, stumbled into the office, wagging his tail. Mark looked at the dog, his brown eyes full of innocent trust, and this only intensified the pain. "At least you're not lying, old man," he said, kneeling down and burying his face in Max's fur. The dog licked his cheek, and Mark felt tears sting his eyes. He hadn't cried since his father's funeral 10 years ago, but now he couldn't help it. This wasn't just a photo. This was a betrayal, a rupture of everything he thought was real. He went back to the computer, wiped the keyboard with a napkin, and opened the log again. There were other messages. Emily and David had been texting all day, short sentences full of innuendo that now felt like knives to Mark. "Are you wearing blue today? I love it when you wear blue," David wrote. "Just for you," Emily replied, adding a kissy emoji. Mark read, feeling the anger replace the pain. This wasn't an accident. This was a system, a damn program they'd run behind his back. His phone vibrated a call from Nick. Mark stared at the screen, unsure whether to pick up. Nick was the only person he had ever shared his suspicions with, and he hadn't even told him about the script. After a moment's hesitation, he pressed accept. "Bro, are you alive?" Nick's voice was cheerful, with a slight hoarseness, as if he had just finished drinking beer. "I wrote to you yesterday, you disappeared. What's going on?" Mark swallowed, trying to sound normal. "Yeah, it's okay. It's just a lot of work." "Yeah, lie more," Nick chuckled. "You sounded like the world was falling apart when you wrote about Emily. Did you find anything else? Or is this all just your paranoia?" Mark looked at the screen, where Emily's photo was still open. He wanted to tell him everything about the script, about the photo, about how his life had turned to shit. But the words stuck. I don't know," he managed. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I'm just overthinking it." "Listen, man," Nick lowered his voice, as if someone might overhear. "If you think something's wrong, talk to her. Straight up. No spy games. You're not in matrices. Just go ahead and ask. Are you hooking up with someone? If she's okay with it, she'll laugh. If not, well, it's better to know than to guess." Easy to say, Mark chuckled, but the laugh was bitter. "But what if she's lying? Or worse, tell the truth?" "Then at least you'll know what you're dealing with." Nick paused. "But dude, don't do anything stupid. I know you're a genius with code, but don't hack her phone or anything. That shit comes back like a boomerang." Mark felt a pang of guilt. Nick was too close to the truth. "Don't worry, I'm not that crazy," he lied. "I'm just tired. I'll talk to her, I guess." "That's good," Nick perked up. "And come over tomorrow. Kate's making tacos. Bring Emily, we'll see how she's doing. We're not much of a detective, but I'll keep an eye on her." "Ha, okay," Mark said, even though he knew he wasn't coming. He couldn't look at Emily and pretend everything was okay. Not after that photo. He hung up and threw the phone on the table. Nick was right, they needed to talk. But how? Say, "Hey, I saw you sending nudes to your boss. She'd deny it, or worse, accuse him of spying, and she'd be right. Mark knew his script was a violation, a fucking ethical hole. But he couldn't stop. Not when the truth was right there in front of him, like open source code. He opened another file from the log, a video sent yesterday. It was short, 10 seconds long. Emily in their bedroom, dancing to some pop song, wearing the same black lace thing. She was laughing, her hair falling in her face, and she blew a kiss at the camera. The caption, "For my favorite boss." David's response, "You're going to kill me, Em. Get a grip at the office tomorrow." Mark turned off the video after 3 seconds. He couldn't watch. This had been their bedroom, their bed, where they'd planned the future, where she'd promised to be with him forever. Now it was where she was filming a video for someone else. He felt the anger boiling, hot and suffocating. He wanted to storm into her office, find David, and punch his pretty face in the face. But Mark wasn't like that. He was a man of logic, of data, of solutions. And now he decided he wasn't going to let them get away with it. He opened his messenger and wrote to Emily, "Where are you? It's late." The answer came 5 minutes later. "At dinner, I'll be there soon. Don't wait, go to bed." Mark gritted his teeth. A lie. He knew there was no dinner. Or if there was, it wasn't with colleagues. He imagined her with David in some bar, their hands under the table, her laughter that used to belong only to him. "Fuck you, Emily," he muttered, throwing the phone down. He went back to the log, copying all the files to a separate encrypted drive. If this was going to lead to divorce, he'd need proof. He hated the thought, but it was inevitable. He wasn't going to be the idiot who got left empty-handed. The rain intensified, thunder rolled over the house, and the office lights flickered. Mark cursed, checking to make sure the script hadn't gone wrong. Everything was working. He opened another message, intercepted an hour ago. David had written, "Are you sure he doesn't suspect anything?" Emily had replied, "Mark, he's too busy with his computers. Don't worry about it." Mark felt the blood rush to his face. Too busy. That was worse than the photo. It was contempt. She thought he was blind, that he wouldn't notice how she was ruining their lives. He imagined her voice, her casual tone, and it ignited something new, not just anger, but a cold, calculating fury. He wouldn't yell. He wouldn't make a scene. He would make them both pay. He pulled up David's LinkedIn to remind himself who he was dealing with. The profile was the same, the perfect CEO, family man, leader. But now Mark could see past the facade. David was the predator, and Emily was his prey. Or maybe she was complicit. Mark didn't know which was worse. He clicked on the profile of Laura, David's wife. Her photo radiated confidence, her severe hairdo, her dark suit, the look of an unforgiving lawyer. Mark wondered if she knew. Or was she, like him, living in ignorance while her marriage crumbled? His phone beeped again, a text from Emily. "Going home. Are you asleep?" Mark didn't answer. He couldn't pretend everything was normal. He closed his laptop, turned off the light, and walked into the living room. Max followed, his claws clicking on the hardwood floor. Mark sat on the couch, looking out the dark window where the rain was making patterns. He felt empty, like someone had erased his source code and replaced it with something else. "What am I going to do, Max?" he asked, petting the dog. "Just leave? Or make them feel sorry?" Max laid his head on his lap, as if he understood. Mark sat in the dark, listening to the rain, thinking about his next move. He didn't know what it would be, but one thing was clear. He wouldn't let Emily and David get away with this. The data had shown the truth. Now it was time to act. Friday morning in Oak Park was deceptively clear, as if nature had played a trick on Mark Johnson, whose life now resembled a dark bug report. The sun was streaming through the blinds of his home office, streaking across the wood floor, but Mark didn't notice the light. He had been up all night, his eyes bloodshot with caffeine and rage, his brain working like an overheated processor. The logs of his script glowed on the screen, but he no longer looked at them. The photos of Emily in her lace lingerie, her text to David, her lies, they were all burned into his memory like a virus that couldn't be removed. He no longer thought about what she had done, but about making them pay. Mark sat at his desk, clutching his third Mountain Dew of the morning. He was out of Monster and hadn't had time to buy a Red Bull. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, but he wasn't writing code. Instead, he opened his browser and typed David Smith, Chicago. LinkedIn returned a familiar profile: CEO of the marketing firm where Emily worked, speaker, mentor, family man. Mark clicked on his photo, David in a gray suit, slightly graying, and a smile that now seemed predatory to Mark. He scrolled through the page, taking in every detail: awards, publications, connections. But his eye caught a link to Instagram, where David shared not only his work successes, but also his family life. Mark opened the profile and froze. Photos of his wife, Laura Smith, and their children, a boy of about 10 and a girl slightly younger, were everywhere. Here they were on a ski trip to Aspen on a yacht on Lake Michigan, by the fireplace at Christmas with their golden retriever. Laura, a tall brunette with sharp cheekbones, looked like a woman who could not tolerate weakness in herself or in others. Her captions were laconic: "Family is everything. Happiness is in the simple." Mark felt a pang of envy mixed with bitterness. Laura seemed unaware that her husband was sending intimate messages to his wife. Or did she know and keep quiet? No, Mark dismissed the thought. Laura did not seem the forgiving type. "You think you're so smart, huh?" Mark muttered, looking at David's photo. "King of the fucking world, but I'll kill you." His voice shook with anger, but something new was growing inside him, a plan, cold and clear as a well-oiled algorithm. He wasn't going to make a scene, wasn't going to punch David in the face or yell at Emily. That would be too easy, too trivial. Mark was a programmer, a data wizard, and he was going to use his skills to hit where it hurt. Not Emily, she was just one part of the equation. David was the target, and Laura, his perfect wife, would be the key. He opened Photoshop, a program he hadn't touched since his freelance logo designing days in college. Now he would need it for something else. Mark decided to create fake screenshots, texts between David and a fictional woman, explicit enough that Laura couldn't turn a blind eye. He knew it was risky, that it was crossing a line, but the line had been crossed yesterday when he saw Emily's photo. Now he was playing by their rules. "If you want war, David, I'll give it to you," Mark whispered, clenching his jaw. His eyes were filled with determination, which mixed resentment, anxiety, and something else, something darker, slipperier, which would have made him shudder if he had had a little more time to think. He opened a new project. A clean screen, empty code, like a blank sheet before madness. His fingers slid across the keyboard almost automatically, quickly, smoothly, as if he had done all this before. The Messenger mock-up, stylized as WhatsApp, began to take shape. Green accents, dark gray background, familiar message bubbles. He knew how everything should look down to the smallest detail. Each element of the interface was not just graphics, it was a trap, a fake, a perfect simulation. He created a fake chat, a contact named David. Just below that, Claire. She didn't exist, but Mark gave her a face. Smart, charming, with a hint of cynicism. The kind he imagined a woman capable of playing a double game. The kind Emily would be wasn't, or what he began to fear that she became. He started typing. "David, are you free today? My wife is away. Claire, just for you, darling." He added timestamps to make the chat appear continuous. He intentionally made a couple of spelling mistakes, carelessness in haste. A few emojis, a voice message that supposedly didn't load. Screenshots of fake video calls. Every detail was meticulous. He even added archived correspondence: yesterday, last week, May 2nd, as if they had a history. Mark paused for a second. He glanced at the screen. The folder with the project was called Version. He didn't know what he meant by that, but the word seemed appropriate. A version of events. Emily's version. His own version of the truth. He looked at the chat as a weapon. He wasn't going to use it right away. Not yet. But the very existence, the possibility of this lie existing strangely gave him a sense of control. At least some. He leaned back and exhaled. A car passed outside, headlights flashing across the wall. And suddenly it dawned on him. If he could fake betrayal, It means he is capable of believing in it, even if it does not exist. Or what is worse, convincing someone else that it does exist. Mark closed his eyes. What have you gotten yourself into, man? But his fingers were still shaking from the tension, and somewhere deep inside, he felt like there might be no way back. But the text was just the beginning. Mark knew that Laura, as a lawyer, wouldn't take words for granted. She'd need proof, something that couldn't be disputed. He opened up an online AI-powered image generation tool, something he'd seen on forums but never tried. After half an hour of experimenting, he produced a photo. A woman who looked like the model in the ad, in a revealing dress, with dark hair and a flirtatious smile. Not too perfect to be suspicious, but attractive enough that David might be interested. Mark embedded the photo into a screenshot, adding a caption from Claire, "For you, boss." "Not bad," he chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "You'd take the bait, David. I know it." He reached for the Mountain Dew, but it was empty. Mark cursed and went to the kitchen, where the refrigerator greeted him with a lone beer and Emily's yogurt. He picked up the beer, cracked it open, and took a long swig. The cold bitterness calmed him a bit, but his thoughts still swirled like an endless loop. He returned to the office, set the beer down on the table, and continued. Now he needed to fake the metadata so the screenshots would look like they were taken with a phone. He wrote a short Python script that generated plausible timestamps and EXIF data for the images. It took an hour, but the result was perfect. Even an expert wouldn't notice the trick. His phone vibrated, a text from Emily. "Running off to work. See you tonight. Love." Mark stared at the screen, feeling his anger flare up again. Love. The word was poison now. He didn't answer, throwing his phone on the couch. Emily had left early. He hadn't even heard her get ready. Maybe she was with David, or just avoiding him. Mark didn't know, and that infuriated him even more. He went back to the screenshots, adding details. Another exchange where David discussed meeting at the hotel, and a second photo of Claire, this time in AI-generated lingerie. Mark tried not to think about how far he'd fallen. This wasn't about morality. This was about justice. David had ruined his life, and now Mark was going to ruin his. The ringing interrupted his thoughts. Nick again. Mark rolled his eyes, but picked up the phone. "Dude, what's wrong with you?" Nick sounded annoyed. "I texted you, invited you for tacos. Emily isn't answering, you're silent. What the hell?" Mark clutched the phone, trying to keep his voice even. "Sorry, bro, been swamped at work. Emily, she's on some project, not herself." "Yeah, the project," Nick chuckled. "Listen, I'm not butting in, but you were like a ghost yesterday. Did you find anything about her and that boss? Or is that it? Has it let go?" Mark looked at the screen, where the fake chat with Claire glowed like evidence. He wanted to tell Nick everything about the photos, about the video, about how he now lived for revenge. But Nick wouldn't understand. He would say, "Talk to her," or "chill out." And Mark couldn't cool down. "Nothing specific," he lied. "It's just, you know when your gut tells you something's wrong." "Intuition is crap," Nick snapped. "Give me the facts. If you don't have evidence, don't get worked up. And if you do something instead of sitting there like a whiner." Mark grinned, despite everything. Nick had always been as straight as a crowbar. "Do it, you say? And what would you do if Kate was messing around with the boss?" "Me?" Nick paused, then chuckled. "Bro, I would come to that fop and say, 'I see your mug next to my wife, one more time you're finished.' But I'm not you. You're so smart, with your codes. You would have come up with something smarter than fists." "Maybe I did," Mark said, his voice colder than he expected. Nick paused for a second. "Wait, are you serious? Are you up to something?" "Mark, don't do shit, I'm serious. If this is some kind of hacker prank, it's not worth it." "Relax," Mark tried to sound casual. "I'm just kidding. I'll talk to her like you said. It's okay." "Yeah, I believe you," Nick snorted. "Okay, keep me posted. And come over today. Kate is already marinating the meat. Don't make me eat tacos alone." "We'll see," Mark said, and hung up. He knew he wasn't going. He couldn't look at Emily and pretend everything was okay. Not after she'd turned their house into a stage for her games with David. He went back to the screenshots, checking every detail. Everything looked perfect. The font, the colors, the shadows. He exported the files as PNGs to preserve the quality and created an anonymous email through ProtonMail. The subject line for Laura was simple: "You need to see this." The body: "Your husband is not who he seems. I'm sorry you have to find out." He attached the screenshots, but his finger hovered over the send button. This was the moment of truth. If he clicked, there was no turning back. Laura would see, David would be exposed, and Emily, what would happen to her, Mark didn't know. He didn't want to know. "You started it, David," he said, looking at the screen. "I'm just finishing." He clicked send and exhaled, as if he had lifted a weight off his shoulders. But there was no relief, just emptiness mixed with adrenaline. He imagined Laura opening the email, her face changing, calling David out on the carpet. This would be more than a scandal. This would be an earthquake. Mark closed his laptop and stood up, his legs shaking. He walked into the living room where Max was asleep on the couch and sat down next to him, petting the dog. His mind raced. What if Laura didn't believe him? Or worse, what if she already knew and didn't care? No, Mark pushed that thought away. Laura didn't seem like the kind of woman who would tolerate betrayal. She would destroy David. And Emily, she would be alone with her lies and her "I love you." His phone beeped, a text from Emily. "Forgot to tell you, office party today, be back late. Don't be boring." Mark chuckled, feeling the anger return. Office party, of course. He pictured her with David at some trendy bar in downtown Chicago, her hand on his shoulder, their whispers. He wanted to type something venomous, but instead he just locked the screen. Let her think he was asleep. Let her think he didn't know anything. He walked back to the office, opened the fridge, and pulled out another beer. It was warm, but Mark drank it anyway, feeling the alcohol dull the edges of his rage. He knew this was just the beginning. Laura was the first step. But then what? Leave Emily? Burn their lives to the ground? He didn't know. But one thing was certain: he wouldn't stop until he saw them fall. Mark looked at his watch, 11:47 am. Emily would be home in a few hours, if her office party didn't drag on. He had to decide what to do when she walked in the door. Pretend everything was fine, or lay his cards on the table. No, he wasn't ready to talk. Not yet. First, he'd wait for his plan to work, until Laura took action. He opened his laptop again, checking for a response from Laura. Nothing yet, but he knew it was only a matter of time. He ran the script to make sure it was still catching data. The log updated. A new message from Emily to David, sent 10 minutes ago. "Bar tonight? Can't live without you." David's response: "You know where to find me, babe." Mark gritted his teeth, feeling his fists clench. Baby. That word was the last straw. He closed the log, unable to read any further. His plan was in motion, and now it wouldn't stop. David and Emily thought they were safe, but they didn't know who they were dealing with. Mark Johnson wasn't just a husband. He was a man who knew how to use data as a weapon, and he was going to fire it. It was a warm Friday night in Oak Park, with the smell of freshly cut grass and the distant hum of a neighbor's barbecue. The only light in Mark Johnson's house was in the living room, where he sat on the couch, staring at the dark TV. His laptop, which usually stayed in his office, sat next to him, closed like a Pandora's box he no longer wanted to open. The script was still running, collecting data, but Mark hadn't checked the logs since the morning. What he'd seen was enough. Emily and David's texts, their plans to meet at a bar, her "I can't live without you." Each word was like a splinter lodged in his chest. Now he waited for her to return, and the wait was harder than anything he'd ever done. Mark clutched a bottle of beer, his fourth that evening, though he rarely drank more than two. The cool glass was soothing to his palm, but not to his thoughts. His plan was in motion. The fake screenshots he'd sent to David's wife, Laura, would have done their job by now. He imagined her opening the letter, her lawyer's mind analyzing every line, every photo. But that was only part of it. The real blow was coming for Emily, and Mark knew that moment would change everything. He wasn't going to scream or beg. He was going to leave, but not quietly. She needed to feel lost. His bag was on the table, casually stuffed with clothes, his laptop charger, and the pack of cigarettes he hadn't tossed. He wasn't planning on going back. Not today, maybe never. Next to the bag was a piece of paper where he'd written a note, but he hadn't decided whether to keep it or not. The words he'd chosen were sharp, like a code fine-tuned to the last line. He wanted them to cut, to make Emily realize what she'd done. But for now, he just sat there, listening to the clock on the wall, waiting for the sound of her keys in the lock. Max, their Labrador, lay at his feet, his muzzle resting on his paws. The dog was tense, his brown eyes darting up to Mark every now and then, as if asking what was wrong. Mark petted him, but even the warmth of his fur couldn't ease the chill inside. He thought about how it had come to this. 5 years ago, he and Emily had been inseparable. She was in college, he was just starting out in tech, sharing a tiny apartment in Evanston, eating pizza on the floor and laughing about their plans. Now their Oak Park home, with its mortgage and neat lawn, was just a backdrop for a lie. His phone vibrated on the couch, a text from Nick. "Bro, where are you? Kate's freaking out. It's getting cold." Emily's not responding. "Is everything okay?" Mark looked at the screen but didn't text. Nick was a good friend, but he wouldn't understand. His world with Kate was simple. Arguments about furniture, vacation plans, love without cracks. Mark couldn't explain what it was like to know your wife was filming a video for someone else, that her "I love you" was just a text sent out of habit. He turned off the screen and leaned back on the couch, closing his eyes. The sound of a car in the driveway made him jump. Max looked up, his tail wagging. The door creaked, and Emily's footsteps, light but sure, came down the hall. She dropped her bag on the floor, her heels clicking on the hardwood. "Mark, are you home?" Her voice came from the hallway, tired, but with that same warmth he knew by heart. Once, that voice had been home to him. Now it seems false, too soft, too familiar to be sincere. "Oh my God, what a day," she continued, entering the living room. "These corporate parties are killing me." He heard the door slam shut, the soft tap of heels on the floor. Emily appeared in the doorway, and for a moment Mark forgot how to breathe. She was wearing a tight black dress, simple but perfectly emphasizing her curves, her thin waist, hips, neckline. The fabric shimmered in the semi-darkness, hugging her body like a second skin. Her light hair was slightly disheveled, as if she had just been kissed in a car. Her lips were slightly smudged with lipstick, a barely noticeable trace, and suddenly this small stroke seemed to Mark like a scream, a trace of someone else's touch. She kicked off her shoes and stepped toward him, her movements still fluid, feminine, full of the effortless grace that had once taken his breath away. The scent of her perfume tart, with hints of vanilla and sandalwood, filled the room, making his heart lurch. His body responded before his mind could stop it. It was Ismaili, the woman he knew, and yet a stranger. A stranger because now every touch, every curve of her figure, every look, everything seemed like a potential lie. Everything begged the question, and for whom was it really today? He looked at her like a man holding a favorite photograph in his hands, knowing that it had already faded. "Hello," he said, his voice low, almost alien. He didn't stand up, didn't smile. He just watched her take off her shoes and sit in the chair across from her, rubbing her neck. "Why are you so gloomy?" she chuckled, but her eyes darted around the room, noticing the bag. "Are you going somewhere?" Mark took a sip of his beer, slowly buying time. He knew what he was going to say, but the words still burned in his throat. He set the bottle down on the table and sat up straight, looking her in the eyes. "You're fired, Emily," he said, "from the family." Her face changed. The smile slipped, her eyebrows furrowed, as if she didn't understand. "What? Mark, what are you talking about? Is this some kind of joke?" "I know about you and David," he said calmly, but every word was like a blow. "I saw your messages. Your photos, everything. Emily froze, her hands falling to her knees. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her eyes, green as spring leaves, darted around, looking for a way out. Mark waited for her to deny, to scream, to blame him. But she was silent, and that silence was worse than any lie. Mark, she finally breathed, her voice shaking. Please, it's not what you think. Not that. He stood up abruptly, and Max, frightened, jumped back into the corner. You send him naked photos, make videos in our bedroom, right? I can't live without you. And this is not that. Don't lie to me, Emily. Enough. She jumped up, her face pale. I didn't mean for this to happen. It was a mistake. Mistake? Mark took a step toward her, but stopped, clenching his fists. Mistake is forgetting to buy milk, and you have sex with the boss behind my back. How long, Emily? A month? 6 months? Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. It's not that simple, she said quietly. You don't understand. The work, the pressure, David, Don't you dare, he snapped. Don't you dare blame it on work. You made a choice. You chose him. And me, I was just a backup plan, right? A husband who's too busy with computers. She flinched as if he'd hit her. I didn't mean to hurt you, her voice broke. I love you, Mark. I really do. It was just stupid. I can explain it all. Love? He laughed, but it was bitter, like stale beer. You have no idea what that means. Love isn't a lie. Not cheating. Not your damn favorite boss videos. Emily took a step toward him, holding out her hand, but he stepped back. Mark, please, give me a chance. We can fix this. I swear, Enough, he raised his hand, stopping her. We're done. I'm leaving. She gasped, her tears flowing freely now. Leaving? Where to? Mark, this is our home, our life. You can't just. I can, he grabbed the bag, throwing the strap over his shoulder. You made this possible. Live with it. He turned toward the door, but her voice stopped him. How did you know? She asked, almost whispering. You were following me? Mark froze, his hand tightening on the door handle. He could have lied, said he'd seen her phone by accident, but the truth was sharper. I wrote the code, he said without turning around. Intercepted your messages, saw everything. You thought I was blind? I'm not as stupid as you thought. She was silent, and this silence was louder than any scream. Mark opened the door, stepped into the hallway, but her footsteps caught up with him. You were spying on me. Her voice was a mixture of shock and anger. You were digging into my life like some kind of hacker. How could you? He turned around, his eyes blazing. How could you? You slept with him, Emily. You destroyed us. Don't you dare blame me for finding out the truth. She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. I didn't mean to, she sobbed. Mark, please stay. We can. No, he snapped, his voice as hard as steel. Goodbye, Emily. He walked out, slamming the door. Her sobs were audible through the wood, but Mark didn't stop. He threw his bag in the back seat of his old Honda Civic, climbed behind the wheel, and started the engine. The rain that was forecast never came, but the sky was as heavy as his thoughts. He drove out into the street without looking back, even though part of him wanted to go back, to hold her, to forget everything. But he knew that was impossible. Not after what he'd seen. Not after what he'd done. Mark drove aimlessly, just away from the home that wasn't his anymore. He pulled into a motel on the outskirts of Chicago, a cheap one with a neon sign flashing above the parking lot. He paid cash for the room, threw his bag on the sagging bed, and collapsed into a chair, staring at the cracked ceiling. His phone vibrated Nick again. Mark, where the hell are you? Emily called Kate, crying. What's going on? Mark didn't answer. He couldn't explain. Not now. Instead, he pulled out his cigarettes, lit them despite the no-smoking sign, and blew smoke toward the ceiling. The note he'd never left was still in his pocket. He pulled it out and unfolded it. You mistook a man for a boy. Now deal with your bosses yourself. The words were harsh, but true. He wanted her to read them, to let them burn her the way her photos had burned him. But he'd left the paper at the motel, figuring she'd understand anyway. He opened his laptop, connected to the motel's Wi-Fi, and checked Proton Mail. No response from Laura, but he knew this was just the beginning. His plan was in motion, and soon David would feel what it was like to lose everything. Mark closed his laptop, lay down on his bed, still wearing his shoes, and stared into the darkness. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Maybe he'd find an apartment, maybe he'd leave Chicago. But he knew one thing for sure. He was no longer the Mark who'd loved Emily. Mark had died yesterday when the logs opened. A siren began to wail in the distance, and Mark closed his eyes, feeling the fatigue finally overtake him. He was not asleep, but he was not awake either. He was somewhere in the middle, in the void where there was no pain, no revenge, only silence. And in that silence, he realized that he had taken the first step. Now all he had to do was wait and see what would happen next. The motel on the outskirts of Chicago smelled of damp and cheap detergent, and the thin walls let in the rumble of trucks on the highway. Mark Johnson lay on the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, where a stain from a leak resembled a map of an unknown country. His bag was by the door, his laptop on a rickety table next to a pack of cigarettes and an empty bottle of beer. He hadn't slept in more than a day, but the fatigue was somewhere on the periphery, drowned out by the adrenaline and the emptiness that had settled in his chest since leaving home. The confrontation with Emily, her tears, her feeble attempts to justify herself. It had all happened yesterday, but it felt like a lifetime ago. Now he was here, in this squalid room, with a neon sign blinking outside the window and the feeling that his world had collapsed and he had set fire to the rubble. Mark stood up, stretched, his neck cracking, and went to the window. It was a gray Saturday morning, with low clouds that promised rain. The motel parking lot was nearly empty, except for an old pickup truck and a rusty Toyota parked out front. He lit a cigarette, despite the no smoking sign, and blew smoke out the crack in the open window. The nicotine didn't help, but it gave him something to hold on to. His phone was on the bed, the screen flickering with missed messages. Nick, Kate, even a couple of coworkers Emily had probably hooked up with. But none from her. That surprised him. He'd expected her to call, to text, to beg him to come back. Her silence was louder than any words. He picked up his phone and opened the messenger. Nick had sent a dozen messages, from "Where are you, dude?" to "Emily called and she's hysterical." "What did you do?" Kate added her own. "Mark, please answer. We're worried." Mark chuckled, but the laugh came out dry as sand. He didn't know what to say. How to explain that his marriage was now a line in the log, marked as error. He wrote to Nick, "I'm fine. Need a timeout. Talk later." He sent it and turned off the phone. He wasn't ready for questions and wasn't ready for pity. Mark returned to his laptop and connected to the hotel's Wi-Fi. The signal was weak, but sufficient. He opened Proton Mail, where he sent the fake screenshots to Laura Smith, David's wife. There was no response yet, but he didn't expect one quickly. Laura, judging by her profile, was not the type to act impulsively. She was a lawyer, used to weighing the facts, checking the evidence. But Mark was confident in his code. His forgeries were flawless. The screenshots, generated with Photoshop and AI, looked like the real thing. Chats, photos, metadata. If Laura believed it, and she would, David would be in hell. He closed his email and opened his browser, almost reflexively going to Instagram. Not Emily's. He'd blocked her account yesterday so he wouldn't see her posts. Instead, he went to Laura's. The latest post was from yesterday. Her at a farmer's market with her kids, everyone smiling, a basket full of apples and pumpkins. The caption, "Fall in Chicago is the best time." Mark watched her face, trying to guess if she already knew. Had her morning been as serene as that photo, or had she already opened his email? He imagined her at the kitchen table, sipping coffee, clicking through attachments. Her fingers clutching her phone, her eyes narrowed in anger. "Come on, Laura," he muttered, taking a drag on his cigarette. "Make his life as shitty as mine." The smoke stung his throat, But Mark didn't stop. He thought about David, his smug smile, how he was probably sitting in his office overlooking downtown Chicago, unaware that his perfect life was about to fall apart. Mark felt no joy in his revenge, but he didn't feel any regret either. It was like debugging code. You find a bug, you fix it, you run it again. David was the bug, and Mark was the one who would fix it. He tossed the cigarette butt into the trash and turned back to his laptop. His script was still running, the logs syncing with his home Wi-Fi, even though Mark was now at the motel. He'd set up a VPN remote so he could monitor the network even when he wasn't home. The new log was empty. Emily hadn't sent anything since he'd left. That was odd. He'd expected her to be texting David, panicking, debating what to do. But her phone was silent. Was she too busy trying to figure out where he'd gone? Or had she just given up? Mark opened the refrigerator in his room, but all that was inside was a bottle of water with suspicious sediment in it. He sighed, put on his sneakers, and walked out to the parking lot. Across from the motel was a convenience store, where he bought a bag of chips, more beer, and a sandwich that looked like it had been put together a week ago. The cashier, a guy with a tattoo on his neck, glanced at him but said nothing. Mark walked back into the room, threw the food on the table, and sat down, looking at the sandwich but not touching it. He had no appetite, only an emptiness that grew with each passing minute. His thoughts went back to Emily, her face when he'd said, "You're fired," from the family. Her tears, her voice shaking. Part of him wanted to believe that she was remorseful, that her "I love you" was sincere. But the other part of him, the part that had seen her text to David, knew it was a lie. Or maybe not a lie, worse, a half-truth. She loved him, but not the way she had before. Not the way he loved her. There was a knock at the door, and Mark jumped. He wasn't expecting company, and no one at the motel knew his name. He walked up to the door and looked through the peephole. Nick, his hair disheveled and wearing an old Bears t-shirt, was standing in the doorway, holding a paper bag. "Open up, dude," Nick yelled. "I know you're here. I saw your ride." Mark cursed under his breath, but opened the door. Nick walked in, throwing the bag on the table. It smelled of tacos and sauce. "Kate said if I don't find you, she'll kill me," Nick said, looking around the room. "Damn, Mark, is this your new lair? It smells like hope has died here." "What are you doing here?" Mark crossed his arms, trying not to show how happy he was to see his friend. "I told you I need a timeout." "Timeout, yeah." Nick plopped down in a chair, opening the bag. "Kate called Emily. She's in tears. She says you left." "What the hell, Mark? Did you really leave her?" Mark sat on the bed, rubbing his temples. "She didn't tell you, did she? About her boss? About how she sends him pictures of herself in her underwear?" Nick froze, taco in hand. "Wait, what? Are you serious? Emily? With that peacock in the suit?" "I saw everything." Mark looked at the floor, his voice even, but inside he was seething. Messages, photos, videos. She was messing with him behind my back. For months, maybe longer. "Shit." Nick put down his taco, his face serious. "What did you do? Tell her?" he said. Mark chuckled. "And then he left. That's it. End of story." "The end?" Nick shook his head. "Bro, this is not the end. This is the beginning of some shitty drama. Where are you going to live? Here? In this bug-infested place?" "Here for now," Mark shrugged. "Then, I don't know. Maybe I'll rent an apartment. Maybe I'll leave." Nick looked at him like he was trying to figure out if this was the same Mark he'd been drinking beer with at Bears games. "Look, I'm no marriage expert, but maybe we should talk." She called Kate, crying like the world had ended. Maybe she really is sorry. Regrets? Mark stood up, his voice sharper. Did she regret making a video for him? When she wrote, "I can't live without you. I don't need that bullshit, Nick." She made a choice. Okay, Nick raised his hands. "I get it. You're angry, and I don't blame you. But what now? Are you going to sit here, drink beer, and write code for revenge?" Mark froze. Nick was too close to the truth. He hadn't told him about the screenshots, about the letter to Laura, but Nick had always been able to read it like open source. "I'm not writing anything," he lied, but his voice trembled. "Yeah, I believe you," Nick rolled his eyes. "You've always been like this, Mark. If you can't solve a problem with your fists, you write a script. But this isn't a bug in the system, this is your life. Don't ruin it even more." "It's too late," Mark said, looking out the window. "It's already ruined." Nick sighed, took the taco, and handed it to him. "Eat it, man. You look like a zombie, and think about what you're doing. If you want, come over. Kate won't mind." "Thanks." Mark took the taco, but didn't eat it. "I'll figure it out." Nick left half an hour later, leaving behind a bag of food and a feeling that Mark wasn't alone after all. But the loneliness was inside, and no tacos would fill it. He opened his laptop and checked his email again. Nothing from Laura, but something had changed on social media. He went to David's page, a new post, a photo with colleagues, including Emily, at a corporate party. Everyone was smiling, glasses in hand. Emily was standing next to David, her hand touching his elbow. The caption, "The team is on top. Work hard, play hard." Mark felt the blood rush to his temples. She was there, with him, after their conversation. After her tears, she hadn't stopped. He opened the script log, a new message from Emily to David, sent an hour ago. "It's okay. He's gone. We're okay." David's response, "Okay, come back tomorrow and we'll figure it out." "We'll figure it out," Mark hissed, clenching his fists. He wanted to smash the screen, but instead he closed the laptop. His plan was working. Laura would find out soon, and Emily and David thought they were safe. They were wrong. He lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling. The rain had started, tapping against the window like a reminder of what he had done. He had left the house, left Emily, set in motion a chain of events that could not be stopped. But in this empty room, with its cheap wallpaper and blinking sign, he felt no victory. Only exhaustion, and a nagging question, what next? A motel on the outskirts of Chicago had become Mark Johnson's temporary refuge, but by Monday its shabby interior with threadbare carpet and a perpetually humming mini fridge had begun to weigh on him like poorly optimized code hogging resources. Outside, a light rain fell, turning the parking lot into a mirror that reflected the neon lights of the Motel 8 sign. Mark sat on the edge of his bed, clutching a styrofoam cup of coffee from the nearby 7-Eleven that tasted more like a warm slope than a drink. His laptop, perched on a rickety table, was turned off for the first time in days, and his phone was silent except for the occasional text from Nick, which he ignored. Mark was trying to start a new life, but for now, it was just existing a gray area between a past he'd lost and a future he couldn't imagine. It had been a week since he'd left the house, leaving Emily to her tears and lies. The confrontation still echoed in his head. Her shaky voice, her attempts to justify herself, his own words, "You're fired," from the family. He didn't regret what he'd said, but every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face, and it was worse than any bug in his code. His plan for revenge, launched with the fake screenshots he'd sent Laura Smith, was still unfolding somewhere behind the scenes, a background process he couldn't control. But here, in this room that smelled of damp and cheap soap, Mark felt cut off from everything, from home, from work, from himself. He stood up, stretched, his back cracking, and went to the window. The rain was getting heavier, running down the glass like lines from a log he no longer wanted to read. His bag was still by the door, unpacked, as if he might break away at any moment. Where, he didn't know. Maybe to Milwaukee, where he had an old friend from college, or further to Minneapolis, where no one knew his name. But for now, here he was in this limbo, trying to figure out who he was without Emily, without their home, without their plans. Mark pulled out his cigarettes, but the pack was empty. He cursed as he tossed them in the trash and decided to get out. He pulled on an old Cubs sweatshirt, pulled on his cap, and stepped into the parking lot. The rain was cold, but Mark took his time, letting the drops run down his face. Across from the motel, the same 7-Eleven glowed like a beacon in this god-forsaken neighborhood. He bought a pack of Marlboros, another coffee, and a Snickers bar, which he immediately stuffed into his pocket. The cashier, the same guy with the neck tattoo, nodded at him like he knew him. "The weather is crap, huh?" the cashier said, ringing up the purchases. "Yeah," Mark muttered, not going into the conversation. He didn't want to be a part of this place, didn't want to be remembered. Back in his room, he dropped his groceries on the table and fired up his laptop. The hotel's Wi-Fi was slow, but Mark set up a VPN to check his tracks. He logged into ProtonMail, where he sent an email to Laura. No response, but that didn't mean she hadn't seen it. He knew that people like Laura didn't write anonymously. They took action. Mark pulled up her Instagram, hoping for a hint. There was no new post, but there was a video in her stories. Her kids playing with their dog in the park, and she laughing off camera. Nothing out of the ordinary, but Mark noticed that David wasn't in the video. Maybe it meant nothing, or maybe his plan was starting to work. He closed his browser and opened the terminal. His script, still connected to his home Wi-Fi via VPN, showed new data. Emily had sent a few messages, but none to David. One to her sister, Sarah, in Seattle. "Mark is gone. I don't know what to do." Sarah's response, "Come see me, Em. You need time." Mark felt a sting, not pity, but something more complicated. Emily was alone, and this was his victory. But it didn't feel like a victory. Another text was to a colleague, Mia. "Can I get your report? I'm not in the office today." Reply, "Sure, but what's wrong with you? You're like a ghost." Mark frowned. Emily not coming to work, that wasn't like her. She was always the one who had everything under control, even in a crisis. Maybe his departure had hit harder than he thought. Or was it David? Mark gritted his teeth, pushing the thought away. He didn't want to think about her with him. Not now. There was a knock on the door, sharp and insistent. Mark tensed, remembering Nick's visit a few days ago. But Nick wouldn't knock like he wanted to break the door down. He walked over and looked through the peephole. Kate, Nick's wife, was standing on the threshold, her hair wet from the rain and an expression that didn't bode well. "Mark, open up," she said, her voice firm despite the rain. "I know you're in there." He sighed and opened the door. Kate walked in, shaking water off her jacket. Her dark eyes swept the room, lingering on the empty cans and cigarette butts. "Oh my God, Mark, is this your home now?" She crossed her arms. "You look like you escaped from a reality show." "Hi, Kate," he tried to smile, but it came out crooked. "What are you doing here?" "What am I doing here?" She stepped closer, her voice sharper. "You dumped Emily, disappeared, won't answer my calls, and I have to sit here and watch Nick go crazy with worry? Are you serious?" Mark sat on the bed, rubbing his neck. "I told Nick I needed time. Didn't he tell you?" "Oh, he did," Kate snorted, sitting down on a chair that creaked under her. "But I'm not Nick. I'm not going to pat you on the head and say, 'Take as much as you need.' Emily called me yesterday. She's in a total turmoil. She says you accused her of cheating on you and left. Is that true?" Mark looked at her, feeling his anger return. "Really? Yes, Kate, it's true. She slept with the boss. I saw her messages, her pictures, everything. Don't tell me I went too far." Kate paused, her face softening, but not completely. "Shit," she said finally. "I didn't know. She didn't tell me. She just cried that you were gone, that it was over." "Because it's over." Mark stood up and walked around the room. "She chose him. I'm not going to be the backup option." "Okay," Kate raised her hand, stopping him. "I get it, you're angry. You have every right to be. But what are you doing here? Hiding? Plotting revenge like in some thriller? That's not you, Mark." He paused, looking at her. Kate had always been as direct as Nick, but she was more difficult. She saw right through him, and it irritated him. "I'm not hiding," he said, though he wasn't sure. "I'm trying to figure out what's next." "Next," she shook her head. "Next, you pull yourself together, find an apartment, and go back to work. You're not homeless, Mark. You have us, you have friends. You don't have to live like some kind of fugitive." Easy for you to say, he chuckled, opening a beer. You and Nick have it easy, but for me, everything I knew turned out to be crap. Kate looked at him, her eyes serious. Nothing is easy, Mark. Nick and I, we fight, we go through shit too. But we don't run away, and neither should you. Emily screwed up, yes, but you don't have to destroy yourself for her. Mark took a sip, tasting the bitterness of the beer. He wanted to tell her about Laura, about the screenshots, about how he was going to destroy David. But Kate wouldn't understand. She would say it was mean, that revenge wasn't worth it. And maybe she was right. But Mark couldn't stop. Not when he'd come this far. I'll figure it out, he said finally. Thank you for coming. Really. But I need time. Kate sighed, standing up. Okay, but if you're still here in a week, I'll come with Nick and we'll drag you out by force. And tell him he's really worried. Deal, Mark nodded, walking her to the door. It was still raining, and Kate pulled her hood up before heading out. Take care, she said, turning around. And I'm sorry about Emily. This sucks. Yeah, he closed the door, feeling her words sink into his chest. Sucks. It was too soft for what he'd been through. He went back to his laptop and opened his browser. This time he went to the page of the company Emily worked for. Nothing new, just an announcement of some advertising campaign. But under the About Us section, there was still a photo of David with his smarmy smile. Mark felt his fists clench. He imagined David sitting in his leather chair, unaware that Laura might already be preparing hell for him. It was the only thought that kept Mark afloat. He decided to check Laura's LinkedIn. Her profile was active, a new post about some legal conference she was speaking at. But in the comments, someone had written, "Laura, are you okay? I heard you and David are having problems." There was no response. Mark felt his heart beat faster. Problems. It could have been his email, or just rumors, but something was going on. He closed the laptop, unable to watch any longer. The rain pounded the window, and Mark lay down on the bed, staring at the ceiling. His new life had begun here, in this room, with his cigarettes and beer. But it wasn't life. It was a pause, a moment before the next step. He didn't know what it would be like, but he knew one thing. He wouldn't go back. Not to Emily, not to their home, not to the Mark who believed in love. That Mark remained in the logs, along with her messages to David. He closed his eyes, feeling the rain lull him. For the first time in a week, he slept without thoughts of revenge. But somewhere deep down, like a background process, his plan continued to work, and soon he would see the results. Emily Johnson stood in the kitchen of their Oak Park home, staring at the empty coffee mug she'd never filled. It was a quiet Tuesday morning, but the quiet wasn't the cozy kind it used to be. It was oppressive, like a bug in the code that couldn't be found. The house that had once been full of laughter and plans now felt foreign to her, too big, too cold, too empty without Mark. His departure, his words, "You're fired," from the family still echoed in her head like a broken record. A week had passed, and the pain hadn't subsided. It was everywhere. In his empty closet, in the silence of their Labrador, Max, in her own reflection in the mirror, her eyes red from crying and lack of sleep. Emily hadn't gone to work since last Wednesday, taking unpaid leave. Her boss, David Smith, hadn't minded, though his texts had become shorter and drier. She knew he could feel her distance, but she couldn't bring herself to play their game. Not after Mark had found out. Not after she'd lost her husband because of her stupidity. She sat at the kitchen island, wearing pajamas that smelled of laundry detergent, but couldn't hide the devastation she felt. Her phone lay on the counter, the screen dark. She hadn't texted Mark, though her fingers had reached for the keypad 100 times. What could she say? "I'm sorry I was an idiot. Come back and I'll fix this?" He wouldn't believe it. And frankly, she didn't know if she believed it herself. Max came over, nuzzling her knee. His brown eyes were worried, as if he missed Mark too. Emily stroked him, feeling the tears welling up again. She hadn't cried like this since she was a child, when her father had left the family. She had sworn then that she would never be the cause of such pain. And now she was worse than him. She had ruined their marriage, and even her regret couldn't fix it. "I'm sorry, baby," she whispered to Max, burying her face in his fur. "I ruined everything." Her phone vibrated, and she jumped. A text from Sarah, her sister in Seattle. How are you? Haven't bought your ticket yet. Window seat waiting." Emily looked at the screen, but didn't answer. Sarah was asking her to come over, to start over, but it felt like running away. She wasn't ready to leave everything behind. Her home, her job, the hope that Mark might come back. Though she knew that hope was like a bug that seemed insignificant until it crashed the entire system. She stood up, poured water into a mug, and put it in the microwave, too lazy to boil the kettle. While the water heated, she went to the window, looking out at their lawn, which Mark always mowed on Saturdays. Now the grass was starting to grow, another reminder of his absence. She remembered their last conversation, his cold voice, his admission that he had been spying on her. It had shocked her then, but now she understood. She had given him a reason. She had lied, hidden, and played a double game. And he, a man for whom truth was in data, had found her in the most logical way. The microwave beeped, and Emily went back to her mug, but she didn't drink. Instead, she opened her laptop, which was sitting on the table. Her inbox was filled with work emails, but she didn't read them. Instead, she went to their shared Google Drive, where old photos were stored. She clicked on the Florida 2020 folder, their trip to the beach, when they were happy. Mark, tan and laughing, beer in hand. Her in a straw hat, building a sandcastle. Their kiss at sunset, captured by a passerby. Emily felt her throat tighten. How could she forget that? How could she trade him for David? David. His name made her sick now. What had started as a light flirtation at a work party, his compliments, his attention had turned into an abyss into which she had fallen. She didn't love him. She knew that now. It wasn't love, it was ego, the desire to feel wanted, special. David was a master at that. His smile, his words, his confidence. But now she saw that he was empty, like an advertising banner that promised more than it delivered. She'd texted him last week, after Mark left, to tell him it was over. His response had been short. "Got it. Take care." And that was it. As if she were just a project that had been shut down. Her phone beeped again, this time with a long vibration call. The screen showed Kate, Nick's wife. Emily froze for a second, as if she wanted to ignore it, but then she picked up the phone. "Medicine." Kate's voice immediately rushed over her, dense, a little harsh, but with a hint of care. "Finally, I've written to you 100 times. Where are you anyway? Are you at work?" "No." Emily's voice wavered, and she swallowed. "I'm home. I took a vacation." "Crap," Kate responded after a pause. "You sound like you've been run over by a truck. Have you ever come to your senses? I saw Mark yesterday." Emily stood up instinctively, as if Kate's words might hit her physically. Kate continued, and there was no longer any irritation in her voice, only fatigue. "He's not in good shape, Em. He looked like the whole fucking world had come crashing down on him." "What the hell happened between you two?" Emily closed her eyes, her throat tightening. I ruined everything," she said, almost in a whisper. "He found out. About me. And David." There was a long, heavy pause. Then Kate exhaled, a long, bitter breath, as if she had been waiting for these words for a long time. "Yes," he said. Emily sat on the edge of the sofa, her fingers shaking. "Kate, I didn't mean to. It was a mistake. I tried to explain to him, but he just left." "What did you expect, Em?" Kate didn't raise her voice, but her tone became harsher. "You were messing around with your boss behind his back. Did you really think he'd say, 'Oh, well, that happens'?" Emily pressed her hand to her face, tears welling up again. "I know. You're right. But," the voice broke, "I just wasn't myself then. Everything was piled up. The pressure, the overtime. Mark and I barely spoke. He was like a shadow. I felt alone. And David, he was just there. And you decided that the best solution was to go to bed with him." Emily winced. Kate didn't mince words. I'm not looking for excuses, she said in a strangled voice. I'm just sorry. To the point of nausea. I would give anything for this not to happen. I want it all back. But he won't even answer. And he does the right thing, sharpness again, but without anger. He's hurt, Em. You were everything to him. Not just his wife. He used to talk about you with such fucking warmth that sometimes I honestly felt awkward. And now he's empty. You should have seen him. He sat in our kitchen, drinking tea, looking out the window, and saying nothing for an hour and a half. I want to talk to him. He doesn't need to talk now, Kate interrupted more softly. He needs space. He's in a motel. He said he can't go home yet. I won't say we're not because I don't want to, but because he needs to be able to breathe. Kate, please. Emily suddenly felt the voice inside her rise to an almost childish request. I need to see him. Hear him. Tell him that I wasn't myself. That I didn't do this for real. Not out of love. It was a breakdown. A mistake. I realized it all. It's too late, but... Then don't run after him, Kate said calmly. You want to help? Start with yourself. With why you did it. Not pressure, not loneliness. But for real. Straight to the point. Without beautiful phrases. And stay away from David. Do you hear me? I'm already done with him, Emily exhaled. I left the project, went headlong into silence. I can't even hear his voice anymore. Fine, Kate paused, then softened. If things get really bad, come over. Nick will cook his stupid tacos, and we'll watch stupid TV shows until 2 am just. Not now. Right now, leave him alone. He's not the type to bury himself forever. But if you push him, he'll just disappear. Thank you, quietly, almost soundlessly. Medicine. Kate added almost in a whisper. You still love him, don't you? Strongly, Emily whispered, closing her eyes. It hurts. I don't know how to show it now. Then keep quiet. For now, and when he's ready, listen. Just listen to him. He deserves at least that. Kate hung up. Emily sat in silence. Max, the old Labrador, lifted his head at her feet and looked at her with his warm, almost human eyes. What do you say, old man? She whispered, stroking his ears. Is there still a chance to fix everything? Or have I finally broken everything? The dog sighed, laying his muzzle on her lap. And she, for the first time in several days, allowed herself to simply cry. Max wagged his tail, but didn't answer. Emily stood up, deciding it was time to move. She couldn't sit in this house, wallowing in regret. She opened her laptop again, but this time she went to her company's website. Her vacation was ending in a few days, and she knew she couldn't just quit. Work was her anchor, even if it was now associated with David. She wrote an email to her HR, asking to be transferred to another department, away from David. It was a small step, but it felt right. Then she opened LinkedIn to update her profile, but came across a post by Laura Smith, David's wife. The photo was from a conference, but the comment underneath made Emily freeze. Laura, hang in there. Heard about David. I'm here if anything happens. Emily clicked on Laura's profile, her heart pounding. No details, but something was wrong. She remembered David mentioning that Laura had become colder in the last few days. Had she found out? But how? Emily felt a chill in her chest. Mark. His words about spying his code. What if he'd done something else? She closed the laptop, her hands shaking. The idea that Mark might not just walk away, but hit David, was terrifying and exciting. She knew what he was capable of. His mind worked like a machine, finding weaknesses where others saw walls. But if he had gone further, if he had ruined David's life the way she had ruined their marriage, what did that mean for her? Emily picked up her phone and opened the chat with Mark. The last message was from her, before he left. Going home? Are you asleep? He didn't answer then, and he wouldn't answer now. She typed, Mark, we need to talk. I know it's my fault, but please give me a chance to explain. Her fingers hovered over the send button. She imagined him reading it, his face twisting in anger. She deleted the text, throwing the phone on the table. Instead, she went into their bedroom, which still smelled of his cologne. She opened his closet, empty except for one forgotten t-shirt. Emily pressed it to her face, inhaling the scent, and the tears began to flow again. She lay down on the bed, curled up like she had as a child when the world seemed too big. Max jumped up next to her, his muzzle in her hand. She stroked him, whispering, "I'll find him, Max. I have to." But where to look? She didn't know what motel he was in, didn't know if he'd ever write back. She could only wait, hope that time and effort would make a difference. She stood up, determined to start small. Clean the house, go to work, write Mark a letter, not a text, but a real one on paper. It might be old-fashioned, but she knew he valued such things. She'd find a way to send it through Nick or Kate. Emily looked at herself in the bathroom mirror. Her face was pale, her hair a mess, but there was a sparkle in her eyes. She wouldn't give up. Not after losing him. She knew she was to blame, but she also knew she loved him. And if there was even the slightest chance she could get Mark back, she would fight, even if it meant facing the truth about herself. The rain had stopped in Chicago, leaving a damp sheen on the pavement and a smell of wet earth that permeated even the stuffy motel room on the outskirts of town. Mark Johnson sat on the edge of his bed, holding a letter he had just found under his door. The envelope was plain, white, with no return address, but the handwriting was familiar, neat, slightly slanted, like someone who was used to writing notes by hand. Emily. His fingers hovered over the flap, hesitating to open it. It had been a month since they had last seen each other, since the night he had thrown her betrayal in her face and left, slamming the door of their house in Oak Park. He had thought he had put an end to it, that his new life, even if it was in this seedy motel with a blinking sign, had begun. But this letter was like a glitch in the system, like a bug you thought you had fixed that came back to ruin everything. Mark glanced at his laptop, sitting on the table next to empty beer cans and a pack of cigarettes. His script was still running, though he rarely checked the logs. The home Wi-Fi he'd connected to via VPN was silent. Emily had stopped texting David, and her messages to others were few and dull. Her sister, her co-workers, Kate. His revenge plot, launched with the fake screenshots he'd sent to Laura Smith, was beginning to bear fruit. Social media was abuzz with rumors. David had disappeared from the public eye, his LinkedIn profile hadn't been updated, and Laura had posted a story with the caption "New Beginnings" that showed no trace of her husband. Mark knew he'd done it, but the victory was not a joy. It was bitter, like the 7-Eleven coffee he drank every morning. He stood up and paced the room, feeling the floorboards creak under his sneakers. The room had become his temporary world. A sagging bed, a musty smell, a TV that only showed 3 channels. He'd been living here for a month, paying cash so no one would find him except Nick and Kate, who had finally figured out the motel. His job, his cybersecurity contract, was the only thing keeping him afloat. He submitted patches remotely, avoiding his coworkers, and that allowed him to pay for the room and food. But his life was out there, somewhere in the house he'd abandoned. Mark returned to the letter, clutched it in his hand, and finally tore the envelope open. The sheet of paper, folded in half, was covered in her handwriting blue ink, lightly blotted, as if she had written in a hurry. He sat down on a chair, unfolded the letter, and began to read. Mark, I don't know if you'll read this. Maybe you've already left. Maybe you'll throw it away without opening it. But I have to try. I have to say what I couldn't when you left. I'm guilty, not just about what happened with David, but about everything. I lost us because I was weak, because I was looking for something I missed, not in you, but in me. I didn't love him, Mark. It wasn't love, it was stupidity, ego, a desire to feel like I was more than I was. But that's no excuse. I know I destroyed what we were building. You were right when you said that I fired you. I did it with my own hands, and now I live with it every day. A house without you is not a home, it's just walls. Max is bored, looking at the door as if you were about to come in. I look there too, but I know you won't come. I quit the company. Not because of David, he was done when you found out. I quit because I couldn't stay there, knowing that place had taken you away from me. I freelance now, doing marketing for startups. It's not the same, but it's fair. I'm not asking you to come back. I know I don't deserve it, but I want to be honest with you like you were with me. You spied, yes, but I gave you a reason. I lied, I hid, and you found the truth the way you know how. I don't blame you. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. Not at the house. I moved in with Sarah in Seattle. But my number is the same. If not, I'll understand. Just know that I love you. Not like I said in those texts, but like I loved you on the beach in Florida, counting the stars. Forgive me, Mark, and take care of yourself. Emily. Mark read the letter twice, his fingers clenching the paper until the edges crumpled. His chest tightened, as if someone had turned off the air in the room. He had expected accusations, excuses, pleading. But this was different, honest, like a line of code without errors. She hadn't denied, hadn't manipulated. She had admitted everything, and that hurt more than her lies. Because now he couldn't just hate her. He felt her pain, her loss, and it mixed with his own. He threw the letter on the table, stood up, and lit a cigarette. Despite the empty pack, he'd found one in his pocket. The smoke stung his eyes, but Mark kept his gaze on the window, where the rain had streaked the glass. Emily was in Seattle, quitting her job. Finished with David. It should have been a relief, but instead it left him feeling empty. His revenge had worked. David was rumored to be on the verge of divorce, his career in tatters. But what good did that do Mark? He was still here in a motel with beer and cigarettes, no home, no purpose. The phone vibrated, pulling him out of his thoughts. Nick. Mark picked up the phone reluctantly. Dude, are you alive? Nick's voice was cheerful, but with a hint of concern. Kate says you haven't responded to her texts. What's up? Alive. Mark took a drag, blowing out smoke. Just busy. Busy? Nick chuckled. Sitting in this bug-infested place and drinking beer that's busy now. Look, Mark, that's enough. It's time to get out. I found you an apartment in Logan Square. Cheap, next to a bar that makes the best wings. What do you say? Mark looked at the letter lying on the table. An apartment. A new life. It made sense, but something inside him resisted. I'll think about it, he said. Thanks, bro. He'll think about it, Nick snorted. Listen, I'm serious. You can't hide forever. Emily's gone, I heard from Kate. She's in Seattle, all snotty, but trying to live. What about you? Are you going to become a hermit? Mark froze. Nick knew about Seattle? Of course, Kate probably told him. Did she call you? He asked, trying to sound nonchalant. Not me, Kate. Nick lowered his voice. She says Emily's really broken. She quit, went to live with her sister. She says she wants to find you, but she doesn't know how. You're not going to talk to her, are you? Mark took another drag, feeling the cigarette burn his fingers. I don't know, he said honestly. She wrote a letter. I just found it. A letter? Nick whistled. Damn, it's like an old movie. What's in there? Asking you to come back? Not really. Mark looked at the paper. He just apologizes, says he loves me, but don't ask for anything. Nick paused, as if considering. Look, Mark, I'm no expert on these things, but maybe this really is the end. She did shit, you left, now it's everyone's on their own. But if you want to talk to her, do it. Don't sit there with that letter like a grenade. I'm not sitting, Mark chuckled, but it was bitter. I don't know who I am without her, Nick. It sounds stupid, but it's true. Not stupid, Nick was serious. But you're not just her husband. You're Mark, the dude who codes like a god and drinks beer like a student. Find yourself. And as for her, you'll deal with her later. Okay, Mark stubbed out his cigarette on the windowsill. Right about the apartment. I'll take a look. That's my guy, Nick perked up. And come over on Friday. Kate's making chili, and I'm getting Kraft. No way to get out of it. Mark hung up, feeling a little warmth from Nick's words. His friends were his anchor, even if he didn't want to admit it. He went back to the letter, rereading the last line. Just know that I love you. He folded the paper, put it in his jeans pocket. He didn't throw it away, but he didn't leave it out in the open either. It wasn't a decision, but a pause. He opened his laptop to distract himself. It was time to get back to work. His contract was waiting for a new patch, and the deadline was tomorrow. But instead of coding, he logged into LinkedIn, reflexively checking to see what was going on with David. The profile was frozen. No posts, no updates. Mark clicked on the page of the company where David was CEO. The new announcement: David Smith is stepping down as CEO for personal reasons. Mark felt a smile twitch at the corners of his lips, but it quickly faded. It was his victory, but it didn't fill the void. He opened Laura's Instagram. Her latest post was of her kids, with Lake Michigan in the background. The caption: "We can do this." The comments were full of support. "You're strong, Laura. Hang in there." Mark knew it was his email that had set the domino in motion. Laura had probably found the real evidence after his fakes. David had been careless, and Emily wasn't the only one. But instead of triumph, Mark felt tired. He'd ruined David's life, but what good had that done him? Emily was gone, he was in a motel, and their house was empty, with a mortgage that someone had to pay. He closed his laptop, stood up, and walked out into the parking lot. The rain had stopped, and the air was crisp, with a tang of gasoline from the highway. Mark lit his last cigarette, looking up at the sky where the stars were breaking through. He thought about Emily's letter, about what she had said about Florida. He remembered that beach, her laugh, her hand in his. It had all been easy then. Not anymore. Back in his room, he decided it was time to move. Not toward Emily, not toward revenge, but toward himself. He texted Nick, agreeing to look at the apartment. Then he opened a real estate website, looking for something cheap in Logan Square. It was a first step, small but real. He didn't know if he'd talk to Emily, if he'd ever forgive her. But he knew he couldn't stay in this motel, in this space between the past and the future. The next morning, he packed a bag, paid the bill, and left the motel. His Honda Civic, faithful despite its years, started on the first try. He drove to Logan Square, where Nick had promised to meet him at his house. On the way, he turned on the radio, and an old Springsteen track filled the car. Mark wasn't singing, but for the first time in a month, he felt like he was breathing a little easier. The apartment Nick found smelled of fresh paint and looked out onto a bustling street of taco joints and graffiti. It was small, with one bedroom and a kitchen barely big enough to fit a table. But it was his. Mark signed the lease, paid a deposit, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like he had a place. That evening, he arrived at Nick and Kate's. The chili was hot, the beer was cold, and their conversation was light, as if nothing had happened. But Kate, handing him a plate, said quietly, "She left a letter with us. I slipped it under your door. Did you read it?" "Yes," Mark nodded, without going into details. And her eyes were curious, but not pressuring. "I don't know yet," he said honestly, "but I'll figure it out." Kate smiled, patting him on the shoulder. "You always figure it out, Mark." He returned to his apartment late, slightly tipsy, and with a feeling that his life might not be over. He took Emily's letter out and put it in his desk drawer, next to his laptop charger. He didn't throw it away, but he didn't reread it either. It wasn't the end, just a new line in the code of his life. And for the first time, he was ready to write it. The story has come to an end, but it is only the beginning. There are even more unexpected turns and exciting events ahead. Subscribe to stay up to date with what others can only guess. Like and comment are your connection to the author. See you soon. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.